Hey everybody, welcome to this module. This is going to be a relatively short one. I'm going to have this video and then another one where I interview one of our campus librarians. And a big part of what I want to do here is obviously in the title of my slide, library and other campus resources. The other resources that I'm talking about, resources plural, is the people, right? The people, including the librarians who are here in this really amazing and wonderful resource that we do have here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and what we have in a lot of universities around the country. Before I go any further, though, I just want to again remind you that there is going to be a discussion assignment that is connected to the research-related homework. Depending on which semester you're in, it's going to be one of those first 3 or 4 homework assignments where you're asked to like get your arms around the scope and the size and the magnitude of the research problem or the design problem that you're working on. And I just want to remind you to document everything that you're doing. That also includes like the sources, the search terms, the research questions, how you go about doing that. That is going to be in a discussion assignment and it will be due after this homework is done, and it should be included in your design notebook as well. So let me just talk here about UW Library System. And I want to say that we have an amazing resource. I mentioned that earlier, and it's highly doubtful that you will ever work in the future in a location, whether it is a big company. I think about big companies like the John Deere Corporation or General Motors or Exxon or a BP. It's highly doubtful that you're ever going to work in a institution or with a company that has this resource that we have. And it is a really important part of your work as a design engineer, as you're scoping out the problem that you're faced with. It is just as important as the other skills that people typically think of when they think of the work as an engineer, whether that's calculating, whether that's drawing, whether that's prototype development. This effort that you're putting in now is just crucially important, and you have a critically important resource in the library system. I will say this, that most companies have a library. The first company that I worked for, fresh out of graduate school, I think I've mentioned this previously, I had spent about a year working out of the home office in Bloomington, Illinois, and our company bought out similar companies in Oregon and Washington. And because I had done fairly well my first year on the job, they said, hey, we're going to have you go out and replicate some of the programs and some of the services that we offer here throughout the state of Illinois in Oregon and Washington. So guess what I had to do? I was given about 2 weeks to get myself up to speed quickly by examining market information, demographic information, economic information. And even though it was a small library, I got to know my librarian very well. It was a little room. It was like smaller than the size of a typical like BSE classroom, but that librarian was invaluable to help me quickly begin to scope out the problem that I was assigned to, and was, in the end, it ended up being a big success because I had really done my homework and I had really done my research, and because I had established that relationship with a librarian. I will also say this, when you think about going into a library, a lot of times people think of the books. And if you go up onto the 3rd and the 4th floor of some of the libraries, you're going to find stacks with volumes of journals and old bound, magazines and things like that. And while that's important content, the real value of a place like the University of Wisconsin Library System is really the virtual content. That's the content that is accessible largely through databases, through being able to go into obscure sources and download PDFs. And the other thing that any library can do, especially in the public sector like the University of Wisconsin, is that they can locate materials that are located all over the world, and in some cases either get you a copy of that article or a copy of that book, or they can arrange for something called an interlibrary loan. So your librarian is really your most important resource, and I really do encourage you to take it seriously, to use those resources effectively. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here. You guys all know how to get to the UW library system. I'm just going to point out a few resources that I think you will find useful. This is the main library page. Do remember that in engineering and science, Steenbach is our main library. Steenbach is located just west of the microbial sciences building. And there's also, on the back side of it, is the parking lot. I think it might be lot 36. So just to give you an idea, if you've never been to the Steenbach Library, you probably ought to go over when it's safe to do so and make sure that you know the people who are there and you know the resources that are available. I'm actually going to direct you to the lower left-hand corner of this slide where it says top 10 databases. And that is this slide. If you click into that link, here's what you're going to find. Just to remind you, Google Scholar at the top and Web of Science at the bottom. I have created 2 videos on those 2 databases. Another one that you want to pay attention to is the ASABE Technical Library. And then another one that a lot of our librarians in science and engineering like to point people to is called Scopus. That's the second one from the bottom, Scopus, Scopus. And that's another database that you may want to check out. But I would suggest that for most of you, as you're doing this initial research, that you're going to find a lot of information with Google Scholar and with Web of Science. The other thing that our librarians have done in Steenbach, they've done a really wonderful job of putting together what they call research guides. The research guides are organized around topical areas, and then they're subdivided. So there's things on agriculture, so plant science and dairy cows and insects and wildlife and ecology and things like that. But there's a really great engineering research guide. I do encourage you to dig in a little bit and to become familiar with the resources that are in this engineering research guide. I want to, in particular, draw you to the resource located at the very bottom where it says product design. Now, I know that some of you are not really designing products per se. I don't consider a stormwater retention pond to be a product necessarily, or a wetland restoration. But if you do go into the product design portion under engineering, under the research guides, product engineering or product design, here's what you're going to find. And if you paid attention to those early couple of modules in the class, I did talk a lot about the research process and the beauty of the way Steenbach, and in particular, our 2 librarians who I showed in an earlier slide, Dave Bloom and Ann Glorioso, the way that they've organized it is around the research process. So it includes looking at the market, and there's going to be a big assignment coming up on market analysis. We also call that empathizing. And again, I earlier linked a video on the importance of being able to empathize with your market, with your customer, with your client. Development of specifications, that's going to become really crucial as we move into the middle part of the semester. Developing design concepts or ideation, that means coming up with ideas and being able to be wild and crazy and creative before you begin to narrow down your choices. And then ultimately from those choices, developing a prototype and doing some testing work. And then in a lot of cases, going back through that cycle, iterating, doing it over again so that you further refine. But there's some really, really great information, and it's organized around those principal ideas or those principal steps in the design process. I also would like to draw your attention to the left-hand side of this page, and that includes the topical areas that include standards. There will be a big assignment coming up on standards, engineering standards in particular, patents, and other issues connected to intellectual property. And then down closer to the bottom, in that bottom third, is market and user data. So just a really, really great resource. I really, really do want you to dive in, to check this stuff out, to make sure you're tracking your search, make sure that you're documenting the work that you're doing. The process is what has the value. The process, if you're a consulting engineer or if you're an engineer for any company, it's that process that they're paying you for. And that's why it's so important that you do that documentation. With that, I'm going to stop the video. I really do look forward to seeing your presentations. And then again, look for some other videos in terms of like meeting with librarians and some of the resources and services that they can provide. Talk to you soon.